Welcome to Night Whispers for Sleep, where dark, unsettling stories help you slowly doze off. If you enjoy these stories, please like and subscribe. I didn't know how long the elevator had been stopped until it started moving again. That was the first unsettling part, realizing I had no sense of when the pause began or how much time had slipped past me while I stood there. At the moment, though, it didn't feel frightening, just strangely empty, like a thought interrupted mid-sentence. The doors were closed, the lights were steady, and nothing suggested I should panic. Still, the silence inside the car felt thicker than it should have, padded and deliberate, as if sound itself had decided to wait. I had stepped into the elevator on the 5th floor with my mind already elsewhere. The building was new enough that I still trusted it, all glass and brushed metal and quiet efficiency. The buttons lit up cleanly when pressed, the doors closed without hesitation, and the descent felt smooth and predictable. I was checking my phone, half reading a message, when the motion softened and then stopped. Not abruptly, not with a jolt, but with the gentle certainty of something choosing to be still. I looked up at the floor indicator out of habit, expecting to see a number blink or change. Instead, it hovered between floors, the glow caught halfway like it couldn't quite remember where it was supposed to land. I waited for the elevator to correct itself. I waited for the lights to flicker or the alarm to chirp or the recorded voice to reassure me that help was on the way. None of that happened. The hum continued, low and even, vibrating faintly through the soles of my shoes. It reminded me of standing near an electrical substation, that constant sound that never quite fades into the background. I told myself the system was recalibrating, a technical process I had heard of but never bothered to understand. The word felt comforting, like a blanket thrown over uncertainty. Recalibration implied intention, logic, a sequence of steps unfolding correctly behind the walls. I leaned back against the mirrored panel and waited. Seconds passed, maybe more, though I didn't check the time. There was no urgency in the moment, no sharp edge to my thoughts. If anything, I felt mildly annoyed, like my schedule had been nudged out of alignment by something minor and impolite. I remember thinking that elevators always stopped at the worst times, when you were already tired or distracted. The strange part, which only surfaced later, was how still my body felt. Not tense, not alert, just suspended, as if the pause had extended beyond the machinery and into me. The air inside the car felt unchanged, neither warm nor cold, but somehow settled. I became aware of my own breathing only because it sounded too loud in the quiet. When the elevator started moving again, it did so without warning. There was no announcement, no audible click, just the sensation of motion returning, smooth and unquestioned. The floor indicator corrected itself and continued on as if it had never stalled at all. The doors opened on my floor right on time, the chime bright and ordinary. I stepped out and forgot about it before I reached my apartment. It wasn't until later, days later, that the memory returned with weight. I was sitting at my desk, distracted, scrolling through a neighborhood forum post about elevator delays. Someone mentioned a stop between floors, almost casually, as if it were a shared inconvenience. Another person replied that it had happened to them too, always between the same floors. That was when I realized mine hadn't been unique. That was also when I realized how long it had felt. I've worked on elevators long enough to know when a stop feels wrong. Not broken, not dangerous, just wrong in a way that doesn't show up on a diagnostic screen. The kind of wrong you don't report because there isn't a box for it. My name is on more maintenance logs than I can remember, scattered across half the buildings downtown. Most days, my work is invisible, which is exactly how people like it. Elevators move, doors open, lights stay on, and no one thinks about the cables or brakes or the people who keep them running. That's the job. The building where this happened was a mid-rise residential tower, modern, clean, the kind of place that smells faintly like new paint even years after opening. Glass lobby, polished concrete floors, a quiet confidence in its design. Residents trusted it, which meant management did too. Newer systems, fewer complaints, predictable routines. I was assigned to Elevator 3 on a Thursday afternoon. The work order was vague, flagged as low priority, the kind that usually resolves itself before I even arrive. Intermittent delay reported between floors, it said, followed by the familiar reassurance. No mechanical fault detected. That line wasn't written by me yet. It would be later. Before I ever touched the elevator, I rode it like a passenger. That's something I've always done, even when I'm not required to. You learn more from how it feels than what the panels tell you. I stepped inside alone, tools still in the truck, doors sliding shut with a practiced ease. The interior was quiet, softly lit, mirrors clean enough to reflect every small movement. I pressed the button for the 5th floor and felt the familiar pull as the car began to rise. It stopped between the 4th and 5th floors. Not suddenly, not violently. Just a gentle deceleration until motion gave up altogether. I didn't check the timer right away. I didn't reach for the emergency panel. At first, it felt like a routine recalibration, the system pausing to confirm its own position. The hum of the motor continued, low and steady, the sound carried through the frame like a held breath. The lights stayed on. The air didn't change. Nothing demanded my attention. That was when I realized I couldn't tell how long I'd been standing there. I shifted my weight, listening for any change in pitch or vibration. The floor indicator hovered between numbers, its glow caught halfway, neither here nor there. I'd seen that before dozens of times, usually for a second or two. This felt longer. Not dramatically longer. Just long enough for my sense of timing to blur around the edges. I told myself not to overthink it. Elevators pause. Sensors recalibrate. Systems check themselves constantly, especially newer ones designed to err on the side of caution. Still, I became aware of how quiet my own breathing sounded in the enclosed space. The hum beneath my feet seemed deeper than usual, not louder, just more present. Like the sound had nowhere else to go. When the elevator resumed movement, it did so without warning. No alert, no change in lighting, just motion returning as if it had never left. The doors opened on the 5th floor right on schedule, chime bright and ordinary. I stepped out, made a note on my phone, and finished the rest of my day. If that had been the end of it, I wouldn't be telling this story. The complaints came in waves. Different residents, different times, same description. An elevator stopping between floors for longer than felt normal. Management forwarded the reports to me with mild irritation, more concerned about perception than safety. They wanted documentation, confirmation, closure. They wanted the phrase that reassures people everything is under control. No mechanical fault detected. I reviewed the system logs first. Motor performance normal. Brake engagement within tolerance. Load sensors stable. No error codes. On paper, the elevator behaved exactly as it should. I inspected the car, the shaft, the control systems. I ran tests during low traffic hours, then again during peak usage. Everything checked out. That's when I wrote the report. Routine language, professional tone, nothing personal. Intermittent stop observed between floors 4 and 5. System recalibration within acceptable parameters. No mechanical fault detected. I signed my name at the bottom and sent it off. It should have ended there. But later that week I pulled the report back up. Not because I was asked to. Because I couldn't shake the memory of standing alone in that car, unsure how much time had passed. I reread my own words slowly. They were accurate. They were correct. They didn't describe what it felt like. Elevators aren't just machines to me. They're spaces people occupy at their most distracted. Phones out, minds elsewhere, bodies trusting the floor beneath them to behave. When something interrupts that trust, even briefly, it leaves a mark. It kept happening, though not loudly enough to force anyone to act. That was the problem. If it had failed outright, if doors had jammed or alarms had sounded, it would have been simple. Instead, it lingered in that narrow space between inconvenience and concern. The first person who mentioned it to me wasn't filing a complaint. They were waiting for the elevator with me, standing a little too close to the wall, hands folded as if bracing for something minor. They asked casually if I worked on the elevators. I said yes. They nodded, relieved, and said they thought so because they had seen me before. Then they said, almost as an afterthought, that elevator 3 sometimes took a long time. Not slow, they clarified, just paused. Between floors. I asked them to describe it. They hesitated, searching for language that wouldn't sound dramatic. They said it felt like the elevator was thinking. They laughed a little after saying that, embarrassed, and waved it off. I told them I'd already checked that car. I told them there were no mechanical issues. I told them what the report said. No mechanical fault detected. They frowned, not in disagreement, but confusion. They said they believed me. They said it just felt strange. That word started coming up more often after that. Strange. Not scary. Not dangerous. Just strange. Within a week, I'd heard the same description from 3 different people. Different ages, different floors, different schedules. Same pause. Same stretch of silence. Same vague sense that the stop lasted longer than it should have. I started asking questions I didn't usually ask. Not the formal ones from the checklist, but softer ones. How long did it feel? What did you notice first? Did anything change before it moved again? The answers were uncomfortably similar. No one mentioned alarms. No one mentioned lights flickering. Everyone mentioned time. One person said they checked their phone and thought it had frozen. Another said they forgot what floor they were going to for a moment. Someone else said they felt pressure in their ears like a quick change in altitude. All of it fell well short of actionable. All of it slid neatly past the thresholds that trigger escalation. When management forwarded the additional complaints, I recognized the tone immediately. Polite concern layered over mild irritation. They wanted reassurance. They wanted consistency. They wanted another report. I pulled up the previous logs before writing anything new. There were more entries than I remembered. Not because there were more incidents, but because they all read the same. Intermittent delay between floors. System recalibration observed. No error codes logged. No mechanical fault detected. The phrasing repeated so precisely that it looked copied. In some cases it was... I could tell because I'd written it. There's a rhythm to reports like these. You learn it early. Use neutral language. Avoid speculation. Describe only what can be measured. The problem was that the repetition started to feel like avoidance, as if the words themselves were being used to smooth something over. I noticed one sentence I hadn't thought twice about before. It appeared in nearly every report tied to Elevator 3. Buried in the middle, surrounded by harmless technical language. Extended stop duration within acceptable limits. I read it again. Then again. It was correct technically. The stops never exceeded the threshold that would trigger an automatic shutdown. They never crossed the line into non-compliance. But extended was doing a lot of quiet work in that sentence. I hadn't needed to use that word before. Most pauses were brief enough to describe as momentary. This wasn't momentary. I started comparing timestamps across reports. Different days. Different times. Same general window of duration. Long enough to notice. Short enough to dismiss. I wondered how many people had stood in that car without saying anything. How many had adjusted their posture or shifted their weight or stared at the indicator while their sense of time stretched thin. The next resident I spoke to didn't wait for small talk. They asked me outright if something was wrong with Elevator 3. I gave them the same answer I'd given everyone else. I gave them the same sentence. No mechanical fault detected. They looked relieved at first, then uncertain. Then they said quietly that they were glad someone was checking. That phrasing stayed with me. Glad someone was checking. As if checking wasn't the same as knowing. I began to notice how often the complaints came in clusters. 2 or 3 in the same week, then nothing for days. Then another cluster. It suggested use patterns, maybe. Rush hours. Weather. Load distribution. I told myself there were explanations. There always are. Still, I started riding Elevator 3 more often. Not officially. Not logged. Just as part of my day. I rode it early in the morning. Late at night. During peak hours. During lulls. Most of the time it behaved. Which somehow made the moments when it didn't feel worse. Each stop was the same. Between the same floors. With the same quiet certainty. I never timed them. That was deliberate. Timing it would have turned the experience into data, and I wasn't sure I wanted to know what the data would say. Instead, I paid attention to myself, to the way my thoughts slowed, to how still the air felt, to the way my body reacted before my mind did. Most behaved as expected. One didn't. I never needed to see it to know. I could feel it in the hum, in the vibration, in the pause. I didn't realize at first that the technician had been inside the elevator themselves. Reading the reports, I assumed they observed from screens, keyboards, safe at a desk somewhere else. But one entry caught me off guard, tucked between timings and standard phrasing. It was written differently, less formal, more deliberate. I rode the elevator myself at 1442 to confirm the observations. The words jumped out at me because they were unnecessary in a log. We didn't include personal experience, not in reports, not in summaries. Yet there it was, calm, factual, quietly admitting the writer had become part of the very system they were documenting. The description that followed made my stomach turn. The elevator stopped between floors 4 and 5 again. The report no longer sounded like a professional document. It read like a confession. The technician noted the hum, the vibration, the subtle shift in air. And then the line I couldn't shake. During the stop, I lost track of time for several seconds longer than the system recorded. Missing time appeared in both accounts now. Not just the residents, not just me. The technician had felt it too. I could feel it in my chest reading it. The words were careful, almost clinical, yet intimate, like they were whispering across the page. I noticed the air felt heavier, as if someone else were in the car with me. It was no longer a detached report. It was a record of something that shouldn't exist. The report didn't say who had written it, only the initials and a timestamp. But I imagined the technician at a desk, eyes narrowing, fingers lingering over the keyboard. Writing because they had to, because they wanted to record something that couldn't be expressed otherwise. I could see it in my mind's eye. The elevator stopped. The occupant stood still, waiting for it to resume. Then a shift, subtle, deliberate, almost imperceptible. Not random, not accidental, as if the body beside them existed but could not be photographed, could not be sensed by anyone but the one inside the car. My stomach turned thinking about it. The small movement, slow and deliberate, made the space feel heavier than it should. The reflection in the mirror, the hum of the motor, the faint vibration beneath the floor, all became part of the moment in my mind. I felt sick thinking about it, though no one had seen anything actually enter the car. The report continued with clinical phrasing, describing the doors, the lighting, the floor indicator. All normal, all functional. But then the technician included observations that weren't mechanical. Notes about shadows, about subtle changes in balance, about sounds the sensors didn't detect. I kept returning to that one line. Occupant adjusted stance as if accommodating another body. I imagined standing in that small humming box of metal and glass. Feeling a weight settle beside me that wasn't there when I looked. Feeling the air shift without a sound. And knowing that the camera saw nothing that could explain it. The report emphasized that the sensors recorded nothing unusual. The load cell didn't detect weight. The motion sensors registered no anomalies. Yet the technician insisted on the observation, leaving it as a trace in the document. Something that could be ignored but could never be erased. I leaned back in my chair and read the line again. Occupant adjusted stance as if accommodating another body. The words repeated in my mind, each syllable weighted with meaning I could not fully define. The rest of the summary described normal operation, doors opening on time, floors reached as scheduled. But I kept seeing the image in my head, the quiet shift, the invisible presence beside someone alone in a confined elevator car. It was impossible, yet undeniable in the careful phrasing of the technician. And I realized then why the reports weren't just logs. They were warnings. Quiet, indirect, buried in neutral words. Waiting for someone to notice, waiting for someone to imagine it exactly as it happened. I couldn't stop imagining it. The elevator stopped. The hum settled around the invisible weight. The occupant shifted slightly, just enough to make space. And I felt the sick, undeniable dread of standing there, knowing the report had captured something I could not see. That line became a rhythm in my mind. A pulse I could not ignore. The car resumed motion, doors opened, time moved forward, everything looked normal again. Yet I could not forget it. Every time I thought of it, I felt that pause again. Slow, deliberate, silent. Measured and yet entirely wrong. It became impossible to separate voices. The residents' reports, my own memory, the technician's account, all layered together. A single pattern emerging from multiple perspectives. A shared unease transmitted through words and experience. The elevator stopped. Time lost a fraction. The hum persisted. The air grew heavier. And the presence, unseen but undeniably there, waited. The technician stepped out finally. Doors opened. Motion resumed. Lights normal. Everything seemed ordinary. but the line remained in my mind. I noticed the air felt heavier, as if someone else were in the car with me, and suddenly I understood why the words in the reports had shifted. The elevator wasn't just mechanical now. It had witnessed, recorded, and contained something beyond measure. I felt it the next time I rode. A twinge of awareness, a subtle shift beneath my feet, the lingering hum. Reading the report had infected me. The fear no longer belonged to the technician alone. It had traveled across pages, across time, and now it belonged to me too. I told myself I wouldn't ride elevator 3 again. That was easy to promise in the quiet safety of my apartment, reading words on a screen. It was harder when I stood in the lobby late one night, tired, keys heavy in my hand, watching the doors slide open. The car was empty. The lights were steady. Everything looked normal. I stepped inside without thinking, muscle memory overriding caution. The doors closed softly behind me. I pressed my floor and leaned back against the wall, already halfway somewhere else in my mind. The elevator began to rise. Smooth, predictable, comforting. It stopped between floors. Not suddenly, not violently. Just the familiar, gentle surrender of motion. The hum continued, low and even, vibrating through the frame and into my bones. I stared at the floor indicator, watching it hover between numbers, caught in that same liminal glow. I felt my sense of time loosen almost immediately. Not fear, not yet. Just a quiet awareness that something was taking longer than it should. I shifted my weight, adjusting my stance without really thinking about it. That was when I felt it. Not a touch. Not a sound. Just the unmistakable sense that the space beside me was no longer empty. The air felt denser, as if compressed by an unseen mass. My shoulder tingled, not from contact, but from proximity. I held my breath without realizing it, listening for anything that would explain what my body already knew. The hum deepened slightly, or maybe I was imagining it. I didn't look to my side. I don't know why. Some instinct told me that looking wouldn't help, that seeing was not the point. Time stretched thin, elastic, impossible to measure. Seconds passed. Or minutes. Or something in between. I became acutely aware of how small the car was, how little room there was for error or escape. I thought of the report. Of the technician's words, so careful, so restrained. Occupant adjusted stance as if accommodating another body. I realized with a slow, sinking clarity that I was doing the same thing. Making room. Sharing space. The elevator resumed motion without warning. The weight lifted, not abruptly but as gently as it had arrived. The air felt normal again, suddenly too light, too empty. The doors opened on my floor with their usual cheerful chime. I stood there for a moment longer than necessary, heart pounding in my ears, forcing myself to breathe. When I finally stepped out, I didn't look back. I went straight home, locked the door behind me, and sat on the edge of my bed in the dark. Sleep didn't come easily that night. The next morning, I opened the report one last time. I scrolled to the bottom, past the technical language, past the measurements and timestamps. There was a line I hadn't noticed before. It was separated from the rest, almost an afterthought, written in the same careful tone as everything else. If this log is reviewed, please do not ride alone. I understood then why it hadn't been addressed to management. Why it hadn't been flagged or discussed or escalated. It wasn't meant for them. It was meant for the next person who read the report and thought they were safe because the system worked. It was meant for me. And by the time I understood what it meant, I had already ridden alone. Now, every time I wait for an elevator, I watch who steps inside. If the car is empty, I let it go. If someone else joins me, I feel a small, quiet relief. Because I know now that the elevator doesn't always stop because something is broken. Sometimes it stops because there is room to be made. And sometimes, if you're alone long enough, something else takes the space you didn't know you were giving up. The forest felt empty but not quite silent. Every step I took along the narrow dirt path seemed to echo, though there was no one there to hear it besides me. I had been planning this trip for months, craving the solitude that only the woods could provide. The city behind me was still alive with noise, but here the quiet pressed against my ears like a living thing. The fading light cast long, wavering shadows between the trunks of the tall pines. I inhaled deeply, the scent of damp earth and pine needles filling my lungs. The rustle of leaves and the soft breeze sounded louder than it should have, almost deliberate. My backpack shifted against my shoulders, heavy with gear I would barely use, but I liked the feeling of being prepared. I had wanted this. No phones, no people, just me in the forest, nothing else. A lone bird called somewhere above me, its cry sharp and sudden, cutting through the quiet. I paused on the path, peering into the dimming trees, and for a second, it felt as if something had moved just beyond my sight. A twig cracked underfoot, but it wasn't mine. I laughed softly to myself, shaking my head, trying to dismiss the momentary chill creeping up my spine. The campsite appeared ahead, a small clearing ringed by trees, its ground flattened as if it had been prepared for many campers before me. I dropped my pack and knelt to start staking the tent, my fingers stiff from the evening air. The metal stakes clinked against the mallet, a sharp sound in the quiet. I tugged at the fabric, adjusting the corners, and the tent finally took shape, standing small but firm in the middle of the clearing. My flashlight clicked on, the beam cutting through the darkening forest, painting the trunks with pale light. I arranged my sleeping bag inside, the rustle of the fabric sounding louder than it should. Outside, a branch snapped, soft and distant, and I froze, listening. Maybe an animal, I told myself, trying to convince my own nerves. The wind shifted, and I could feel the chill of it brush across the back of my neck, like a soft hand grazing my skin. I glanced around the perimeter of the campsite, shadows stretching long and deep as the sun sank further behind the hills. For a moment, I could swear a shape moved between the trees, a fleeting shadow that vanished before I could focus. I shook my head again, forcing a laugh, and told myself it was nothing. I sat on the edge of my sleeping bag, unzipping my pack to pull out some water, the zipper's hiss sounding sharp in the silence. The forest seemed to inhale around me, the leaves whispering secrets I could not understand. I brushed the feeling off, taking a slow sip, but the unease lingered at the edges of my mind. Every little sound seemed magnified, the distant call of a bird, the whisper of the wind through the pines, the crunch of leaves under invisible feet. I leaned back against the tent, watching the forest darken, and the shadows seemed to lean closer with every passing moment. The thought crossed my mind that maybe I wasn't entirely alone, though I laughed quietly at the absurdity of it. A dry leaf skittered across the clearing, carried by the wind, and for a heartbeat, it looked like a small, crawling figure. I tightened the straps on my pack as if that alone could keep whatever was away. The last sliver of sun disappeared, leaving only a dull twilight that made the forest feel endless and unknowable. I crawled into my sleeping bag, zipping it up to my chin, listening to the soft, insistent rustle of leaves. The woods settled around me, but I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on my back, watching, waiting. I told myself to sleep, that everything was fine, but even as I closed my eyes, the forest felt alive, and I could not shake the sense that the night had only just begun. Night fell fully, and the forest darkened into a thick, almost tangible shadow. The last light from the horizon vanished, leaving only a dim glow behind the treetops. The air grew cooler, carrying the scent of wet earth and fallen pine needles. I unrolled my sleeping bag fully, trying to get comfortable, but the forest seemed to breathe around me. A distant owl called, long and mournful, echoing through the trees like a warning. I could hear the faint trickle of a nearby stream, its gentle babble oddly soothing in contrast to the heavy silence. Then came the first sound that didn't belong. A soft, irregular crunch like someone stepping on dead leaves. I froze, my breath caught in my chest, listening. The sound came again, circling, moving closer, then farther, then closer again. I strained to see, sweeping the flashlight beam across the clearing, but there was nothing. My heart beat faster, and I told myself it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. But the pattern felt deliberate, too precise to be natural. I zipped open the tent door just a crack, peering out into the darkness, trying to catch a glimpse of movement. A shadow flickered at the edge of the clearing, too quick to identify, and then it was gone. I swallowed hard, wishing I had brought someone with me, wishing I had not come alone. The footsteps began again, soft but steady, circling the tent in a slow, deliberate rhythm. I tried to call out, my voice trembling, but the words caught in my throat. I fumbled for my phone, only to remember there was no signal, no way to reach anyone. The forest felt impossibly large, closing in on me from all sides, alive with unseen watchers. I gripped the flashlight tighter, shining it through the trees, catching nothing but the glint of wet leaves. Every small sound became magnified, a branch snapping, a bird calling, the wind shifting in an unsettling way. I tried to reason with myself, thinking maybe the footsteps were echoes, or my imagination running wild in the dark. A low rustle near the edge of the clearing made me jump, and the flashlight trembled in my hand. I whispered to myself, telling myself it was nothing, but the rhythm of the steps didn't belong to anything in the woods, it belonged to someone, something calculating. A faint scraping sound near my feet made me jerk, the sleeping bag shifting under me. I could feel the weight of eyes, unseen but unmistakable, watching my every movement, following my every breath. The wind moaned through the trees, and it sounded almost like laughter, soft and cruel, brushing against my ears. I whispered a prayer, barely audible, hoping someone would hear, hoping the forest itself might intervene. The footsteps moved again, circling closer now, pausing at each corner of the tent, deliberate, teasing, patient. I shook, my mind racing, imagining every nightmare I had ever heard of, every story of campers who vanished without a trace. A zipper somewhere in the distance creaked, slow and deliberate, making me flinch as if it had been right outside the tent flap. I tried to convince myself to sleep, telling myself I had survived the first night, but every nerve screamed that this night was far from over. Something small brushed against the tent wall near my shoulder, light but unmistakable, and I flinched violently, holding my breath. I could hear nothing else besides the slow, deliberate circling, and the silence of the rest of the forest felt suffocating. I tried to stay awake, straining to catch a movement, a shadow, any sign of what prowled outside. My flashlight flickered, and for a heartbeat, the beam caught a figure at the edge of the clearing, indistinct, then gone. I pressed back into the sleeping bag, shaking, my mind caught between disbelief and terror. The footsteps stopped again, leaving only the whisper of wind and the distant call of some night bird. I realized then that whatever circled me had been out there all night, patient, knowing, waiting for me to notice. Sleep was impossible, and the hours stretched endlessly, every minute thick with fear, every shadow threatening to move. The night had grown heavy, and I knew the darkness held something beyond the ordinary, something watching. I lay there, silent and still, feeling the forest breathe around me and knowing the night was far from over. The first pale light of dawn filtered through the trees, soft and gray, washing the clearing in a cold glow. I unzipped the sleeping bag slowly, my body stiff and tense from hours of vigilance. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of wet earth and dew, but it offered little comfort. I crawled out of the tent, every step cautious, eyes scanning the perimeter for anything unusual. The clearing seemed calm now, the forest quiet as if it had been waiting for daylight to return. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to shake off the lingering fear that had rooted itself to my skin. The flashlight, now dim in the daylight, lay on the ground, casting small shadows that seemed less threatening. I took a deep breath, trying to reassure myself that perhaps it had all been imagination. But then I saw the first footprint, faint in the soft mud near the edge of the clearing. It was too large to be an animal and too deliberate to be accidental, pressed carefully into the earth. My stomach tightened as I followed the trail, noticing more footprints forming a rough circle around the tent. The rhythm was unmistakable, matching the steps I had heard in the night, moving in deliberate loops. I crouched to inspect them, my fingers hovering above the cold, damp earth, almost afraid to touch the proof of my fear. A broken branch lay across the path, snapped cleanly as if someone had stepped on it in passing. I walked slowly, tracing the edges of the clearing, noticing small disturbances in the leaves, subtle signs that someone had been here. A faint scrape mark on a tree trunk caught my eye, low enough that it could have been caused by a hand or a tool. I stepped back, heart racing, the adrenaline of the night still clinging to my nerves. The forest around me seemed ordinary now, but the evidence at my feet told a different story. I collected my gear slowly, my movements deliberate, scanning the edges of the clearing constantly. Every small sound made me startle, a snapping twig, a bird taking flight, even the brush of the wind against my tent. I could not shake the feeling of eyes following me, lingering just beyond the reach of vision, patient and unseen. As I packed the last of my things, I wondered how long this intruder had been watching, how many others they had targeted before me. The sun rose higher, light spilling through the canopy, revealing the quiet beauty of the woods in contrast to the terror I had endured. I paused one last time, glancing back at the campsite, half expecting to see someone standing there, but there was only empty clearing and silent trees. The footsteps, the circling, the presence, everything was confirmed in the evidence I left behind, and yet the person remained unseen. I slung my backpack over my shoulders, trying to steady my trembling hands, knowing that the safety I sought had been an illusion. The forest around me seemed unchanged, but I knew it held secrets, and some of them had brushed against my life in the dark. The drive to the ranger station felt longer than it should have, the forest receding slowly behind me. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white, as the memory of the night pressed against my thoughts. I could feel every snap of a twig, every shadow in the passing trees, imagining footsteps circling the car just as they had the tent. At the station, the ranger looked up from a stack of paperwork, his expression neutral but alert. I explained everything, my words tumbling out in a rush, my voice still shaky from the adrenaline of fear. He listened carefully, nodding, asking questions, jotting down notes in a small notebook. When I finished, he leaned back and said quietly that they had been tracking reports of a stalker in the area. Other campers had complained of footsteps, strange sounds, even missing items, but no one had been caught. The ranger's tone was calm, but the weight behind his words made my stomach turn. I asked what they were doing about it, and he explained that they patrolled, monitored, and warned solo campers to avoid certain trails. He showed me a map with several marked spots, including the clearing where I had camped, confirming that my night had been part of a larger pattern. I swallowed hard, feeling both relief and a deeper unease, knowing that the person who had circled my tent might still be out there. I asked if anyone had been caught, and the ranger shook his head, a small frown tugging at his lips. I realized then that this was a threat that lurked in the shadows, patient, unseen, and persistent. The evidence I had collected, the footprints, the trampled leaves, the broken branch, was not enough to bring it to light entirely. As I drove away from the station, the forest stretched along the roadside, quiet and ordinary in the daylight. But I knew better now that the dark hours held more than just animals and wind, that some eyes watched patiently from the shadows. I tried to focus on the road, on the sun spilling across the hills, but every tree along the edge seemed alive with possibility. The thought crossed my mind that the stalker might have been watching even now, unseen, letting me leave, waiting for the next moment. I told myself not to look back, not to imagine what might be there, but the forest had changed for me, the sense of isolation forever altered. I promised myself I would never camp alone again, that the solitude I sought would be tempered by caution and awareness. And yet, a part of me, the part still tinged with fear, knew the experience would linger, a shadow in my mind whenever I walked through the woods. The forest behind me was silent, the wind rustling leaves, birds calling, nothing to hint at the presence that had been there all night. But even as the trees disappeared from view, I felt it, a subtle, impossible awareness that I had not been entirely alone. The road stretched on ahead, bright and clear, but the memory of the circling footsteps, the unseen eyes, the careful stalking, stayed with me. Even now, I could hear it in my mind, soft and deliberate, the echo of someone waiting just beyond the reach of sight. The night had ended, but the story of the camper who wasn't alone would remain, etched in my memory like the footprints in the mud. The taxi pulled up in front of the hotel. Rain tapped lightly against the windshield, soft and constant, as if the night itself were hesitant. I paid the driver, slipping the bills into his hand, and he gave me a nod that lingered a moment too long. The hotel's neon sign flickered, buzzing faintly, the red letters casting a dull glow over the wet pavement. I stepped out, feeling the chill seep through my jacket sleeves, and the smell of damp concrete and old carpet hit me. The revolving door creaked as I pushed through, the lobby quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. No one else was in sight. A clerk stood behind the front desk, hands folded, watching me approach. His smile was polite, but something about it didn't reach his eyes. "Welcome," he said, voice low and smooth, almost too measured. I handed over my ID and credit card, fumbling slightly in the uneven lighting. He scanned them quickly, eyes flicking to mine and holding for just a fraction too long. "Room 412, he said, sliding the key card across the counter. The card felt cold in my hand. I noticed the lobby itself seemed oddly empty. The chairs were arranged neatly, but one seemed just a little off angle, like someone had moved it and forgotten to put it back. A faint scent lingered, something I couldn't identify. It was sweet, almost floral, but under it was a sharp tang, like metal or something decayed. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it. The elevator dinged as I pressed the button, and the doors slid open with a smooth, hollow sound. The smell seemed stronger inside the elevator. I stepped in, pressed the button for the 4th floor, and watched the indicator light move slowly upward. The reflective walls made the space feel tighter than it should, and I caught my reflection twice before realizing it wasn't quite lining up. I frowned, blinking, and the image seemed normal again. The elevator stopped, doors opening with a soft hiss. I stepped out into a dimly lit hallway. The carpet muffled my footsteps, thick and worn. The walls were beige, almost yellowed with age, and the wallpaper pattern repeated too perfectly, unnervingly so. I followed the numbers to 412, key card ready. The door looked ordinary, polished brass handle, a small peephole, a card slot that blinked green when I swiped. Inside, the room seemed clean. The bed was made perfectly, sheets tucked in tight. A chair sat by the small desk, facing the window. I noticed it first. It wasn't quite aligned with the desk. I paused, thinking maybe housekeeping had been careless. The window was closed, curtains drawn, but a thin sliver of light leaked along the edge, casting a faint line across the floor. I set my bag down on the luggage rack. The room smelled faintly of perfume, the same odd sweetness from the lobby. I shook my head again, muttering to myself. I turned on the lamp beside the bed. The light flickered once, twice before holding steady. I pulled open my suitcase and began unpacking. A subtle draft brushed across the back of my neck. I froze. The window was closed. I chalked it up to the old building settling. I placed my clothes in the drawer, neatly folding each piece. A shadow passed across the room just at the corner of my eye. I spun around, but nothing was there. The chair by the desk now seemed slightly closer to the bed than before. I could have sworn I had moved it back when I set down my bag. I leaned against the desk, rubbing my eyes. The reflection in the mirror caught my attention. It seemed off. For a brief moment, my reflection smiled back at me when I hadn't smiled. I blinked rapidly, heart picking up speed. The air felt heavier, sticky, as if I were breathing in more than just normal air. I shook my head again, trying to dismiss it as nerves. I went to pour a glass of water from the sink. The faucet squealed as it opened. The water ran clear, but for a second I thought I saw ripples in the mirror behind me that weren't caused by the water. I set the glass down, hand trembling slightly. A distant sound came from the hallway. Soft, like someone shuffling their feet across the carpet. I froze again, straining to listen. Nothing followed it. I told myself it was a guest returning to their room. I walked to the bed and sat down, trying to steady my breathing. The chair was still slightly askew. I looked toward the window at the thin line of light. It almost looked like a figure standing there for a second before disappearing. I jumped slightly, gripping the edge of the mattress. The room seemed perfectly normal again. I ran a hand through my hair, telling myself it was exhaustion, the long travel, the rain. But the smell lingered, that sweet, metallic scent, stronger now. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The hum of the air conditioner was louder than it had been before. I pulled the blanket up to my chin. The silence of the hotel pressed in from all sides. I told myself to sleep, to forget the oddities. But deep down, I knew the room was not quite right. Even if nothing was there, I didn't feel alone. And that feeling, creeping slowly through my bones, was the first thing I couldn't shake. I sank into the chair, pulling my phone from my pocket. The glow from the screen seemed brighter than it should have been, cutting through the dim room. I scrolled aimlessly, trying to distract myself from the oddities I had noticed earlier. The hum of the air conditioner seemed louder now, almost pressing against my ears. A soft creak came from the hallway outside my door. I froze, my thumb hovering over the screen. Another creak followed, this one closer, sharper, deliberate. I told myself it was the old building settling. Maybe a guest returning from dinner. But the sound didn't match the timing of the floors, didn't echo like the other rooms. I set my phone down on the desk, listening harder. A faint shuffling came from the corner of the room. Or maybe from the bathroom. I shook my head, rubbing my eyes. I convinced myself it was my imagination, that I had been on the road too long, too tired. I picked up the remote, turning the TV on. Static filled the screen for a moment before the image appeared. The show was mundane, nothing to hold my attention. Yet I kept glancing toward the corner of the room, feeling eyes where there were none. The bathroom door was slightly ajar. I could have sworn I had closed it when I got the water earlier. I got up to check, walking slowly, ears straining. The room was empty. Nothing on the sink, nothing in the tub. I closed the door again, more carefully this time. The soft click echoed strangely in the silent room. I returned to the chair and noticed the desk drawer slightly open. I hadn't left it that way. Inside, a folded note sat where nothing had been before. I picked it up cautiously, unfolding the paper. The handwriting was messy, hurried, but I didn't recognize it. It said nothing at all, just a single word: stay. I swallowed, dropping the note back inside the drawer. A faint breath of cold air brushed my neck. I spun around, but the room was empty again. My bag sat where I had left it, the bed perfectly made. I sat back down, trying to calm my racing heart. The TV show droned on in the background, but I couldn't focus. Another noise, softer this time, like someone shifting their weight just beyond the line of sight. I convinced myself it was the chair settling, the air vent rattling. Yet, I felt a subtle pressure in the room, something watching from the shadows. I glanced toward the bed, noticing the blanket slightly rumpled. I hadn't touched it since I lay down. My stomach tightened. I picked up the phone and dialed the front desk. The line rang once, twice before a familiar voice answered. "Yes, this is the front desk. How can I help you?" the clerk said, calm, normal. I think someone might be in my room," I said, voice low, trembling slightly. There was a pause on the other end. "Sir, your room is empty except for you," the clerk said. I swallowed, trying to steady my voice. I thought I heard something," I said. "Perhaps a neighboring room," he suggested, tone even, polite. I nodded, though no one could see me. I hung up, setting the phone down with a clatter. The note still lay in my drawer, its message heavy in my mind. I got up, pacing slowly across the room, trying to check each corner. The chair by the desk now faced slightly toward the bed, as if someone had sat there and left in a hurry. A glass of water sat on the nightstand that I hadn't poured. I froze, heart hammering. I didn't remember leaving it there. I leaned closer, half expecting it to move, half wishing it would. The reflection in the mirror caught my eye again. For a moment, I thought I saw someone standing just behind me, dark and still. I spun around, but the room was empty. I couldn't shake the feeling, the tightness in my chest, the weight of eyes I could not see. I returned to the chair, gripping the arms tightly. The air seemed heavier, almost viscous, as if the room itself were pressing in on me. A faint whisper, so soft I thought I imagined it, drifted across the room. I couldn't make out the words. I told myself to calm down, to rationalize. The hotel was old, the floorboards creaked, the air conditioner hummed, neighbors moved about. I tried to read, picking up the book I had brought, but my eyes refused to focus. Every sound made me flinch, every shadow looked like a figure waiting. I glanced at the window, at the thin line of light from the hall. Something moved there for a split second, like a shadow slipping along the wall. I jumped, gripping the edge of the desk. The room seemed ordinary again. Yet, I knew it wasn't empty. Something had been here, or was still here. I sat back in the chair, chest heaving, staring at the note in the drawer. The word "stay" burned in my mind, and I realized I might not be alone after all. I stood slowly, every muscle tense, listening to the silence of the room. The note still lay in the drawer, its single word burned into my mind: stay. I moved toward the desk, noticing the chair again. It was now turned slightly toward the door, as if someone had been sitting there watching me. A chill ran down my spine, sharper than before. The air felt cold in patches, like invisible hands brushing past me. I touched the doorknob, half expecting it to move under my fingers. Nothing happened. I exhaled, but the sound of my breath seemed too loud, echoing strangely. A faint shadow flickered across the wall, just at the edge of my vision. I spun around, heart hammering, but the room appeared empty. The glass on the nightstand was now closer to the bed, as if pushed. I froze, my mind racing. The bathroom door, I remembered, had been closed, locked even. I approached it slowly, hand trembling as I touched the handle. It swung open on its own, revealing a darkened room, completely empty. I stepped back, my chest tight, the hairs on my arms standing. I backed toward the bed, gripping the blanket as if it could shield me. A soft thump came from the closet. I turned, stomach knotting, ears straining. Nothing moved, yet the sound repeated, a slow, deliberate tapping. I wanted to call the front desk again, to tell someone, to prove I wasn't imagining this. I picked up the phone, dialed, and nothing. The line was dead. I tried again, tapping the buttons frantically. Silence. I realized the door was locked from the inside. Not by me. My pulse thundered in my ears. I thought back to the clerk, his smile lingering too long, the way he had handed me the key. Something about him had felt off from the start. I remembered the lobby, empty except for that faint, sweet smell, the slightly askew chair. My eyes darted around the room, noticing every shadow, every corner I had ignored before. The chair near the window now faced inward, toward the bed rather than out. A soft whisper drifted across the room, almost unintelligible. I wanted to run, but the hallway outside seemed distant, unreachable. The elevator doors downstairs had sounded far away, not like they belonged to the same building. I thought about the guests who had been here before, the ones whose names I'd seen scribbled in the hotel ledger. A memory flashed, a conversation I overheard at check-in, someone saying the fourth-floor rooms were a little unsettling. I had laughed it off, thinking it was a joke. Now it seemed like a warning. The TV flickered, casting moving shadows that were not part of the show. A shadow paused at the edge of my vision, dark and still, then vanished when I looked directly at it. I moved toward the door, testing it again. It would not budge. I pounded lightly, hoping someone would hear, hoping it was just a malfunction. A scraping sound came from behind me. Slow, deliberate, like someone dragging a hand along the wall. I spun around, eyes wide. The desk drawer opened slightly, as if pushed by a hand I could not see. I stumbled back, heart racing, ears straining for any other sign of movement. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed darker, heavier, almost solid. I remembered the reflection in the mirror from before, the moment it had smiled when I had not. I approached cautiously, dreading what I might see. This time, my reflection did not move at all. But the room behind me seemed different. A coat hung on the back of the chair that was not mine. The glass I had not poured was now on the desk, half full. And the whisper came again. Closer this time, behind me, almost at my ear. I spun, and the room was still empty, yet every instinct told me it was not. I backed toward the bed, needing to see every inch, every shadow, every object. The cold patches of air followed me like fingers along my arms and neck. I remembered the clerk, the subtle tension in his gaze, the way he had insisted the room was empty. My stomach turned as the thought struck me, maybe he knew exactly what was here. I moved to the window, pulling the curtains slightly, hoping to see someone outside, someone real, something tangible. Nothing but the empty hallway outside, glowing faintly under the emergency lights. And yet, the air in the room felt alive, heavy with presence, watching, waiting. I realized then that this was not a joke, not imagination, not fatigue. Someone or something was in the room with me, and it had been here from the very beginning. I backed toward the bed, chest pounding, sweat prickling at the back of my neck. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to shift, moving closer with every heartbeat. A soft thump came from the hallway outside my door. Then another, heavier, deliberate. I stumbled to the desk, knocking the glass over, spilling water across the surface. A chair scraped across the floor behind me. I spun around, eyes wide, but the room appeared empty. The lights flickered once, twice, plunging the room into near darkness. I froze, listening, every nerve on edge. Footsteps, soft at first, then louder, echoed across the carpet behind me. I whirled, heart hammering, and caught a shadow sliding across the wall. It moved too fast, too fluid, to belong to me. The note in the drawer had fallen to the floor on its own. I bent to pick it up, but the wind in the room, there was no open window, blew it toward the bed. A cold breath brushed my shoulder. I spun sharply, arms raised. No one was there. The desk drawer slammed shut with a force that shook the entire desk. I stumbled back, tripping over the edge of the bed. The lights flickered again, then went out completely. In the darkness, I could hear it clearly, the sound of breathing. Slow, deliberate, close enough that I felt it in my ear. I fumbled for the lamp, my hands shaking, heart hammering. When the light came back, the chair was now facing me directly, the coat draped over it moving slightly, as if someone had just let it fall. I froze, staring, unable to move. Then a shadow appeared in the mirror behind me. I turned, but the room was empty. The shadow had vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving only the faint outline of darkness on the carpet. I ran to the door, yanking at the handle, but it would not budge. A heavy thump echoed from inside the closet. I backed away, tripping over my own suitcase, falling to my knees. The glass from the desk slid across the floor on its own, leaving a wet trail toward me. I could feel it, the presence closing in, surrounding me. My breaths came in short, ragged gasps. I grabbed the blanket from the bed, dragging it across the doorway like a flimsy barricade. Another thump, louder, closer, reverberated through the walls. The desk chair tipped over with a crash, the sound deafening in the small room. I crawled behind the bed, pressing my back against the wall, trying to make myself small, invisible. And then I saw it clearly for a brief, horrifying moment. A figure, dark and featureless, standing at the foot of the bed. It tilted its head, watching me. A cold, unnatural smile stretched across its face, teeth glinting in the faint lamplight. Before I could react, it vanished, leaving only emptiness and the smell of that sweet metallic tang in the air. I tried to call out, to scream, but no sound came. I picked up the phone, dialing frantically. Dead. I ripped the phone from the base, shaking it, tapping buttons, anything. Nothing. I stumbled toward the window, tugging at the curtains, hoping for escape. The window wouldn't budge. The lights flickered again, plunging the room into darkness. Every object in the room seemed alive, moving just outside the corner of my vision. The blanket fell from the doorway as if pulled by invisible hands. I pressed myself against the floor, trying to disappear, wishing I could vanish entirely. Another shadow darted across the ceiling, low and fast, leaving a trail of cold behind it. I could hear breathing again, slow, deep, deliberate, just inches from me. I covered my face with my hands, praying it couldn't see me, praying it would leave. A chair scraped the floor, closer this time, and then silence. The room seemed to hold its breath with me, waiting. And then, without warning, the closet door swung open violently, slamming against the wall. I screamed, barely holding back, crawling backward against the bed. The glass on the desk shattered into pieces, the shards scattering toward me like a warning. I backed into the corner, trapped, shaking, every nerve screaming at me to move, to escape. And just for a moment, I felt it directly. A hand brushed the back of my neck, icy cold, lingering far too long. I gasped, spinning again, but the room was empty. The note from earlier lay on the floor, now upside down, as if someone had flipped it while I wasn't looking. I pressed myself into the corner, chest heaving, staring at every shadow, every movement, every flicker of light. The air was thick, heavy, alive. And I knew then, without a doubt, I could not leave. I waited in the corner, heart hammering, hands pressed to my face, unsure how long I had been there. The room seemed to breathe around me, heavy and silent at once. Then slowly the sound stopped. The shadows retreated into the corners, leaving only stillness. I pushed myself to my feet, every muscle trembling. I crept to the door, hand on the handle, dread coiling in my stomach. The lock clicked open this time. I froze, listening for any sign, any movement behind me. Nothing. I slipped into the hallway, moving quickly, quietly, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. The elevator dinged as I reached it, doors sliding open with a soft hiss. I pressed the lobby button, heart hammering. The ride down felt endless, the air thick and stale, as if the building itself were holding me inside. I reached the lobby, gasping, and saw the clerk behind the front desk. He smiled at me, polite, calm, ordinary. "Everything okay, sir?" he asked, voice smooth, professional. I swallowed, nodding, forcing my voice steady. "Yes, everything's fine," I said, though my chest still burned with adrenaline. The lobby was empty, quiet, normal, nothing like the oppressive darkness of the room behind me. I left the hotel without looking back, stepping out into the damp night. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement glistening under the streetlights. I told myself I had imagined it all. Exhaustion, stress, the isolation of travel. I shook my head, forcing rational thoughts into place. Sleep was impossible that night, every creak, every shadow outside my window drawing my eyes, my ears strained. Morning came, pale and gray, and I called the hotel to check out remotely. The clerk sounded the same, cheerful, nothing amiss. I paid my bill, trying to laugh off my fear, trying to convince myself it was over. Weeks passed, and the memory began to fade, though a gnawing unease lingered at the edges of my mind. I thought I had escaped, left it behind like a nightmare in another world. Until one night, months later, I returned to the city. Curiosity, foolishness, or some pull I couldn't resist drew me back to the hotel. The same elevator, the same hallway, the same floor. I hesitated at room 412, hand trembling on the handle. I pushed the door open. The room was perfectly clean, exactly as I remembered it. The chair was in its original place by the desk. The bed was neatly made, sheets tucked in tight. Nothing appeared out of place. I exhaled, trying to convince myself it was all memory, imagination, the residue of fear. Then I saw it. A single sheet of paper on the desk, folded neatly. I approached slowly, heart hammering. I unfolded it, hands trembling. It was a note, written in a hand that looked exactly like mine. The word "stay" scrawled across it, jagged, hurried. I dropped it, stumbling backward, breath caught in my throat. The air felt heavier, thick with the same sweet metallic scent I remembered. I turned to leave, faster this time, but paused. The chair by the window now faced inward, toward the bed, just like before. I could feel it again, a presence in the room, watching, waiting. And for a moment I realized the room remembered me. It had never been empty. I ran, ignoring everything, down the hallway, through the lobby, into the street. Even outside, the feeling lingered, a cold press at the back of my neck, a shadow at the edge of my vision. And though I left the building behind, I knew I would never truly leave room 412. It would remember me, and it would always be waiting.